Welcome to episode 13 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, Keeping Projects on Track, we discussed the challenge of moving SEO projects along and how to improve your chances of success. In this episode, we're going to discuss the benefits of uniform URL structures in multinational websites. Well, I'm sure there's a few others, but I'd say for me, there's really four main reasons for a uniform URL structure. And we'll talk about these in more detail, but simplified site maintenance, I think it's a good thing to know, especially with multinational sites, where things are. You get better analytics tracking. I like the idea of having a uniform structure for a simplified site migration and setting up redirects, even if you're not migrating sites, but taking down pages. And our favorite topic, Hreflang implementation. I know this is near and dear to your heart. Why don't you tell us what you mean by a uniform URL structure?
Sure. So what I mean by that is, let's say we sell Super Acme widgets in 10 countries. The URL for Super Acme widgets would be the same no matter what market I went to. So we would have the same folder structure. Maybe the domain, if we're using ccTLDs, would be different, obviously. Or if we're using a generic top-level domain like .com, we would change our country and language folder. But after that, why can't it be the same? Why can't it be, I don't know, if we need a products folder and then it's, Acme, it's Acme is the company, but maybe we have a folder for Super, and then whatever the widget name is. But we find that people deviate that all over the world. And you gave some great examples of why we would want this uniform. The one I argue the most is analytics, because, if I was a global manager, I'd want to know, how am I doing, in all the markets? Is somebody up, somebody down, somebody really up, and we can benefit from them? And you mentioned Hreflang. So at Hreflang Builder, I have so many examples of what I would refer to as chaos and nonsense. We had a brand that had 27 different ways that they referenced just their
You mean the URL?
the URL for the homepage, right? One market might be, Germany might be a .de, and then it goes right into some URLs, maybe even it was home. Some would be index. Some would be, I think one version was like homepage was the name of the homepage instead of index or nothing. But the domain structures, they had like japan.mysite.com. Then another market might be KR for korea.mysite.com. Then they had top level domains that had, URL countries or language, even though they just designated the country with the top level domain. So we had all these different variations. And even in our setup screen, I think we have 85 different variations of how people, and these are people that we've encountered, have set up this basic infrastructure. Because the way Hreflang Builder works is we're trying to identify URIs, the piece after the domain, the piece after the domain and country language setup. We're just simply trying to find that the page, if you will, so that we can match it to other same pages. And these have just been insane. We've had people that might have a country language folder, then in some cases have a country language folder right after it. So it's in there twice. We've had people that had country language folders, 17 folders deep.
I've seen folders for language and then another folder and then another folder for the region.
Yeah. And let me just pause for a moment and say there are sometimes very legitimate reasons for this. That the number one is they probably don't have the budget to have a different CMS license. And so they end up trying to kludge this way in there. We've seen that where people say, look, we don't have an extra, $200,000 or whatever to spawn this. So, we've done this or that. We've had other cases where, they might have had a language or a country folder, and then it's like, oh, wow, we're launching another language in Belgium. So we didn't have a provision for a language folder because we had country folders.
Mm.
And in addition to that, just the URL config. In the article that I'm putting up to go along with this podcast, I give examples of a product where they use like 9 different variations of just SKU IDs on the end. And then some might say shoes, and then women's shoes, and then flats, and then slash slides, slash whatever. And it's like, 9 levels just to get to the actual, product page. And some of this is legacy back in the old days where we didn't have a CMS, where we didn't have things that were data driven. And so some of these really old school thinking people believe they've got to literally segment everything out the way they used to because that's where we stored stuff was in those deeper levels. With Hreflang Builder, just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude, we have 50 different methods to try to match URLs. 50. And these are wildcards to even do things like when people have men and men's, or child and children or
Yeah.
kids, no consistent naming. And that's all I'm asking for is consistent naming convention across markets. And we see this a lot now when people are moving in between e-commerce systems. So if you move from Commerce Cloud to Shopify, they don't take the time to do a rewrite. I've seen enterprises back in the day when you could always tell when somebody had just recently moved to AEM because they had the entire route path from AEM mapped out. It would be W, then slash G for global, and slash this and slash this. And it's a very simple command to rewrite that, not redirect, but rewrite to a clean URL. And that's where the SEO friendly or clean URL mindset came from because there was a difference between a system location and a presentation URL. And I think these are a lot of things where people don't understand that should change because the people building the site, in many cases, it might be somebody like a Deloitte or whatever. They're just building something and may not understand. And so let me take this couple minutes and talk about how can this happen? And let me just get on my soapbox for 1 minute. Lack of governance and organization, right? There's no
Yeah.
OCD person saying, I want URLs like this because I guarantee if you had an OCD person in charge, they would never allow some of these things to happen. And because they just can't comprehend things being radically different. Decentralized web operations. That's the second biggest culprit. They get to do it what they want. And because there was not even a recommendation of URL structures, they just did either what was out of the box. Whatever Shopify produced, they produced. Or whatever the agency built, they produced, especially if there's a net new site in a new market, those type of things. A third one, which we can understand, is acquisitions. When you shoehorn an acquisition into your site, it might deviate. You acquire somebody and they've got 10 sites and they built them. Even if they had an OCD person in charge, they're all uniform, but they'll never match to yours and things like that. So I think this is why it happens. And even as we've recommended in previous episodes, just giving people simple guidance. Hey, your URL should look like this. And if your SKU changes, that's fine. Then we're only dealing with a SKU change. But then if we have necessary deviations, then we should at least put a token or a code. Even on WordPress, there's plugins for you to have a unique, tag to say this AX is equal to B. These two deviations are equal to each other. You can do that in your analytics. You can put a global product ID. Because if you have it for analytics, you should be able to bundle this. The challenges requiring deviation are definitely different CMS and infrastructures. I don't necessarily buy that, but I understand it. Because if somebody detailed out what they wanted using rewrite rules, you can do this. And I think when I see people that argue, like we've just had one 2 weeks ago where they're arguing, well, we're moving to Shopify and Shopify says that we're married to this URL structure. And I'm like, well, they might be married to it, but you can rewrite it. Not
Could
redirect it, but rewrite it at your CMS, even at Cloudflare using workers, you can do it.
could you
And
could you go back, for people who aren't familiar about rewriting and tagging, can you describe that in a little bit more detail?
sure. So the way most data-driven CMSs, they create a placeholder URL for that location, which is essentially telling it, go get this asset in this folder. And then that way it's nice and neat and organized. But that usually looks ugly and there's a lot of levels. So within these systems, there is a setup to say A is equal to B. It's exactly like a redirect. This ugly location in our system is equal to this. The easiest way to think about this is an 800 number. We use 800 numbers or 888 numbers now in many cases to eliminate the need from people to have to remember a local phone number. And we
Mhm.
can use vanity, 1-800
Bill.
call law or call Bill. Yeah, that's a great one. 1-800 call Bill. We need to see who that actually rings. But that's exactly the best analogy, right? They don't need to remember, either of our phone numbers because if they punch in 1-800 call Bill, then they're going to get to us. We've taken the ugly URL or the ugly phone number and made it pretty. And in all of these systems will do that using a rewrite function that before, when it's requested, when the public URL is requested, it knows to go get this ugly URL or this system location URL. That's rewrite.
Hmm.
And this works in IIS, it works in all the different operating systems. They have different names, but essentially it's all a rewrite. And it's not a redirect because it's not done up front where the user would see it. It's done on the back end. And so every CMS can do this.
Similar
And think
to
of it.
rewriting www, adding it, or
Exactly.
adding a trailing slash if it's missing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Except that is a rewrite. That is a redirect rule, but the rewrite symptom that's how you phrase it in most systems. It's exactly that. When it encounters a non-www, it writes www. It's exactly the same principle.
Mhm.
And that's what we're doing. And it happens to every URL has a location. So a lot of these you can fix. And if you can't, like when people say Shopify can't do it, you're married to our structure, then that's fine because we can actually do that out in Cloudflare with a worker long before, because a user is going to request this public URL and Cloudflare would know what the equivalent backend URL is. So there's ways to work around it. But if you can't, then just be mindful that you're going to have to do a mapping somewhere of A equal B for analytics, for hreflang, for redirects, for anything. And just remember that now your templates for every deviation means you're going to have to deviate how the template is built. And like we said earlier, another acceptable reason is when people don't have the budget to do things the right way. Hey, we don't have money for multiple license of our CMS, or our CMS can only have this format. Another one of my pet peeves is when CMSs use language and country folders to basically do the parent-child relationships between markets. And if you have a regional site like LATAM or APAC, or the Middle East, you're stuck with that convention. And this is why we end up with so many people putting ESLA, because they're trying to signify this is my Spanish site for Latin America. And then because their hreflang system or their country pull down uses that logic, we end up with, people saying, hey, this Latin America site is actually tagged for Laos or, for Macedonia, for Middle East or things like that. So, or the one we saw, I think I outed Seagate recently, so I can mention them here. They're using AP or AS for ASEAN, and that was American Samoa. All right. So again, it's a system limitation that's causing this. And so if you really have that, then okay, you need to do what you need to do. But if you're on a same CMS, if you've got this rigor and consistency on a CMS level, then try to get people to adapt this. And if you do a rebuild, try to get them to conform. And again, like we've advocated multiple times on previous episodes, get people in a room, get people on a web call and say, hey, do you have to use women's, or can you use women instead of women's? The other one we're encountering now is in America, gender neutrality. So
In
on the
URLs?
in URLs where
I haven't
before
seen
it
that.
was men's and women's, and
Yeah.
they're taking out the gender, and this goes into that. But we run into this with Hreflang where they say, no, I do have a women's and a men's. I need them to match up to the other markets. It's like, but you only have one URL. You've degendered it. So even though in your country pull, and this is what's interesting in the pull down, they can go into men's or women's or children, and then click this button for like whatever it is, jackets. And then it does take you to just a jackets page. And they've commingled, I'm going to say feminine styles versus sort of male styles.
Hmm.
Things that maybe a man would wear, or
So it's
a
the
couple
jackets
rows.
category.
It's a jackets category page,
Yeah. Yeah.
but all the other markets still have a men's and a women's. So
Right.
what do we map that to? So those are interesting things that we have. And again, that's a corporate geopolitical decision we made in the United States. So you're not going to be able to change it. So we're going to have to think about how do we work around it? How do
Hmm.
the other markets deal with that? So again, it becomes a lot of extra work because we've done things by accident, because we didn't have rigor, because we have to. And I just really want to acknowledge that because too many people say I'm always ranting about things that they can't fix. And if you can't fix it, then you just have to accommodate it, and which means a lot of extra work. Going back to your first benefit that you identified is simplified management. A lot of people like to use relative URLs on their website because guess what? I can take this English language site, I can drop it into the UK, and if I used relative URLs, boom, all is good in the world.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
Hey, what do you say to people that want to translate the folder products into French for France?
I'd say, why are we doing it? If they say because their SEO told them to do it, then I would probably tell them we don't need to do it.
Right.
It's hard now that Google still shows URL fragments in the search results. People like that. That's the argument I get, especially when they know I'm going to be on the call. They'll say, well, we're not doing it for search, but yes, we are. We're doing it as a breadcrumb trail. So they see it in the local language. That, again, we can't argue with that. It makes sense. If you've done that, again, how are you going to map these later? Whether it's for Hreflang, whether it's for analytics, the fact that two are different. And if you do it, if you do decide that that your reason is that if people see, and this is the argument I make, once they've clicked the URL, they're not looking at the URL. So it's hard for me to argue until Google changes it, the URL fragments in the search results, seeing it in French or German, there's still merit to that. Does it increase clicks? I've never seen a study that showed that it did, but it's hard to argue against brand people and linguistic purists that they don't. So fine, do it. But then you need to accommodate a mapping mechanism for this. And what I tell people is if you're going to do it, then come up with consistency. Again, if you're using women and then you're using the French equivalent for women, then keep that because that's an easy thing that you can align.
Right, right. And what about for file names? Page URLs.
They should be the same too, right? Why can't we?
Yeah.
Now, unless you have a difference. Now, a lot of CMSs actually use SKU or the product ID as the unique ID, fragment part. So if you use that again, the same thing. Now, we've had people that had 4 different suppliers or they use the local market SKU, and it's like, fine, then I just need a lookup table. I need a matching table to know that SKU 45 is equal to SKU 45. That's a global product ID.
Yep.
So IKEA and people have introduced this where you'll find a code typically in their analytics string, which will be like local PID or GPID. And GPID is the number that they have in their ERP system to say, look, guys, this is, this black stapler and it's model 75, right? So it's a model 75 black stapler. So you might call it a model 75-A or -B for blue, but it's still that model, whatever it is. So you need to have that commonplace.
Yeah.
Another big one that we've encountered a lot is a category page versus with filter system or fragments or facets for having all those pages. And what I mean by that, so for example, let's go back to our Acme Super Widgets. We offer them in 5 colors and 6 sizes. So let's say 8 of our markets all have an Acme Super Widgets homepage, if you will, category page, product main page. Then in these 8 markets, they all have an option for you to click blue, and that may append a parameter where it changes it and shows you the blue one. And that way we can track that people wanted the blue one. But you still have a category page. Now, if you go to other markets, they didn't do the category page, but they have the 6 color pages and 8 size pages where we had however many colors and sizes, but they don't have a main page. So when people are looking for that, which do they get to? If I'm looking for Acme Super Widgets and you don't have a category page for Acme or product homepage for Acme Super Widgets, but you've made a decision to make it one of either your most popular color and your most popular size, which is it? And so, especially for Hreflang, we can't match that. And there's no apples to apples in analytics either, that people were looking for Acme widgets that we could see traffic and then see how they cascade down into choice.
Right.
And when I've asked them, how come you don't have a category page? They're like, we never thought of that. We just made a page for each product variation. And as we know with Google, they've told us they don't necessarily need your blue and green one, purple one, or your large, small, extra small. They just need to know that you have one. And if we get back into my most hated phrase in the SEO vocabulary is link juice, right? How do we distribute link juice if we don't have a category page? The UX people will tell me, Bill, you can select it in the nav, Acme Super Widgets, and then we have a nice little pull down in JavaScript that takes you to all of them. But we don't have a page that's linked to our hierarchy that then links out. So we don't really have a benefit of internal linking that we would want. So anyways, these are challenges we face. You can have every one of these if you want. It just means you've got to work around it in some other way. And that's what we're saying is that simplify your management. Just, if no one cares to have a different variation, then if you give them a recommended format, 9 times out of 10, they're going to use that format. And if they push back, then try to convince them why the format is necessary. Maybe it's an analytics requirement. Maybe it's a legal requirement. Maybe it's just because your damn contract says they have to have it. Any of these things. And then I think that's key. And then at the end of the day, the other big one is cost effectiveness, right? It's so much more effective. And in our last episode, we talked about that challenge of creating content. What about localizing that content? And if we need to deploy it in other markets, then we've got to change the template before we can deploy it. We just can't take that English content or the Spanish content or the French content and deploy it in 2 or 3 other markets. We have to totally redo it, adding cost. And then if you're trying to do Hreflang, that one of the biggest barriers we've had with Hreflang Builder over the years is nobody wants to do the mapping. They don't want to say this localized French page is equal to this localized German page, which is this totally different URL structure localized page for French Morocco. Because, it's our chaos and we love it. And then the big one isn't there some AI that can magically come in and sort it out for us? So all of this adds cost, all of this adds overhead. And all I'm saying is just ask. And if you did nothing more, going back to one of our first couple episodes about center of excellence, just give them, it's amazing when you give people direction. Here's a guide, not a rule, but a guide. Here's a guide on how you might want to form your URLs. Here's a template that we've already pre-built. Can you insert your stuff into it? It's fascinating the number of people that will take that on versus arguing that they need to rebuild everything.
Yeah. I think this is all great stuff and an important topic. And if you ever get to design a site from scratch, I don't know why someone would ever want to not have consistent URLs. So good. Well, I think that's a wrap. Any final comments?
Yeah, I just, really want to reiterate that. Ask people why, get it into your workflow, but really, the more you can try to get this consistency, the better. And worst case, at least see why they deviate. And if in a rebuild, they would be willing to make it more uniform. But yeah, that's about it. Just hopefully one of these benefits will trigger a need to have uniformity in your organization.
Thanks. And if you're enjoying the show, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us to keep making these and plan future episodes. You can give us feedback by following International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, where you'll see links to all of our episodes, and you can like, comment, and share. Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying Hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.